Okay, so hi everybody, thanks so much for coming this evening, on this Monday evening, and it's great to have so many of you back from the session last week as well. So most of you will know who I am, but I'm Louise and I'm the curator at BOM, which is Birmingham Open Media, and we are an arts organisation working at the intersection of technology and science. We have a venue in Birmingham in England, and we run lots of different sort of coding clubs for young people. We do a lot of stuff around neurodivergent adults. We have science, arts and technology exhibitions throughout the year, as well as our artist digital skills program, of which this is a part of. So this is Art and Tech Social, where we try and support people who want to bring a bit more technology into their creative practice by running different events, which before COVID were always physical, but now they're online, and we will sort of reassess it really, because actually being online is difficult in some ways, but it has opened up a new audience and new people to the content. So we will be looking into that afterwards. We are at BOM Lab, BOMLAB, on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. So please follow us and tag us in social media. Please sign up to our newsletter on the website and all those sorts of things. And thanks very much. And we're delighted to have Dan. So thank you to Dan for preparing and delivering these brilliant workshops. And I really hope that you all enjoy it.
Thanks very much. Cool. Right. Are we all sitting comfortably? Brilliant. Then we can begin. Right. So there's a couple of people in this one who weren't in the last one. So I'm just going to quickly just give you a bit of context, because I'm going to send out a lot of stuff after this. So last week we covered two things. The first part of the session was really looking into interactive fiction as a form, and we were looking at kind of what makes it tick, why I enjoy working in it, various examples of various flavors of interactive fiction, and we really sort of dug into kind of what this kind of storytelling imbues, and the difference between a kind of a reader and a player, and what that means for the experience and all that good stuff. So I'm going to send that out to those of you who missed it. But so originally I was going to run 2 sessions, and I thought it was going to be 2 different groups of people, and I was going to do that twice, but I'm not going to put you through that. So those of you who didn't catch it, obviously it's on the recording as well, but I'll give you the slides with all my notes and everything. So this one, so last week we talked about Twine, and we did a couple of practical hands-on demos. I still use Twine in quite a lot of my work, and I'm a massive, enormous fan of it. It's a particular flavor of interactive fiction. So we've been talking about this kind of branching path idea. We touched on little bits of variables, so we can change the state of the game, and the game knows what you've done, what you've seen, what you've picked up, all of that good stuff. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at what, for my money, the other prevalent interactive fiction technology at the moment. Now, technology is come and go, as in all things. Twine and Ink, for me, are the two options, really. Obviously, there are lots of people, every man and his dog at some point has made an interactive fiction engine, it feels like sometimes. I prefer not to reinvent the wheel. I also prefer having technology that has a big community around it, particularly a really diverse community. So both Twine and Ink have grown really big groups of people and creators around them who are telling interesting, diverse stories. And it's something that it was almost the first thing out of my mouth last week was the reason that I love this stuff is that the doors have been open to everybody in terms of creating stories. And I tend to gravitate away from tech that is quite exclusive in terms of, oh, I could only make games if I'm a straight, white, privileged, middle-class male who's had a college, education. Whereas technologies like Twine and Ink, you can run this stuff on a toaster if you ask it nicely enough. And really the only barrier to it is creativity. And you can make really exciting, accessible games open to everyone that tell your story regardless of who you are. And I think that's the magic of this stuff. Now, that being said, this is going to be a bit more of a technical session. So I know that this group, so the challenge with these sessions is always that these groups tend to be a mix of writers, programmers, people with a bit of coding experience, people with no coding experience whatsoever. So I am very aware that those of you who don't have much technical stuff, it will have been a massive tidal wave of information for you to understand, and I can help you through it a little bit. Twine is a bit more visual, so obviously you're making blocks and you're connecting them together. There's a little bit of markup to make things kind of work and kind of sing. Ink is entirely text-based. That doesn't mean it's more complicated. Ink is slightly more, whereas Twine creates kind of web pages essentially that let people play the game. Ink is more designed as an engine for other engines. You still can make a web playable version, and we'll do that again, so you can kind of see how to distribute things. But Ink really shines when you're trying to make an experience in a language like JavaScript, for example, or whatever. I use a language called Hax, which is an open source cross-platform language. But really, the kind of Ink is like the kind of churning engine in terms of how you write and produce content. Just to give you an idea of what an Ink story looks like before we dig into our own, so my big game that I put out over the last couple of years is Closed Hands, which I mentioned last week in the slides. Closed Hands is 130,000 word, 5 or 6 character, 200 odd scenes, like monster of a game, but it's all written in Ink. And I've got the files here, and I just wanted to grab one to show you how close to writing Ink actually is, because 99% of an Ink file is actually just prose and writing, and then you sprinkle in a little bit of magic to make it interactive, which I really like. So if you just bear with me one moment, I'm going to grab a couple of sample files. We're not going to read them or anything, but I just wanted to show you what the makeup of these things is. So I'm going to share my screen. Everybody see that? Lovely. Where are we? Okay, so if I dig out some of my files, so I'm separated by character, and I'm going to find a text scene. So you can see here we've got a .inc file, which is the stuff that we're going to work on today, and then you can spit out JSON files, which is what you would read in. But at the moment, all we're going to care about today is just working in Ink. So if I open this, so I've just picked a completely random file here. There we go. So what you can see here is Ink is very, very text-based. And the idea is that Ink allows you to write, just write. And once you get the kind of syntax under your fingers, when you get into that flow when you're writing, either code or text, and you kind of forget what you're doing, and you don't trip over the tools. You can just write, and you're writing and writing, and you can get into the zone and all that good stuff. I think Ink really lends itself to that. Whereas Twine, I wrestle with it quite a lot in terms of kind of having to figure out what works and what doesn't work, going in and out of different windows, connecting boxes, dragging stuff around. Whereas Ink is much more about going, okay, I just want to write, and the interactive part will happen because I'm doing it in Ink, if that makes sense. So the way it works is it starts top to bottom, exactly as if you were reading a page. And you can see actually this whole bit here that I've highlighted is just text. So you don't have to do anything clever for your story to begin. And then we've got, and I'm going to dig into kind of the code and stuff in a minute, but making things like buttons, for example. So this is a little button, and you can see here, it pops up here. Sorry, it's a bit sweary. This is a very adult game. So it's a bit sweary, but we've got a button. And when I press it, on the right-hand side is a playable version. And the reason we use Inky, and the web version plays the same as well, is that as you're writing and you're making branching pathways, you can keep playing. And you can see I've got little bits of tags, and most of it is my writing, though. I'm not kind of having to dress up any styles or markup or anything like that. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is that Ink is about the text. It's a story engine. And so what you can't do with Ink is spit out like Twine lets you color things and move things around, and you can say, oh, this is dialogue, so I want it to be purple and indented, for example, or whatever, or I want to include a JPEG, that sort of thing. Ink is a bit more, it's just more focused on the text, really, and so you tend to plug it into things. You can see here it does have a tagging system, and tagging is really useful. So here I'm telling my game engine that this is speech, and when you play it in the game, anything that's in speech will have a character color, and it'll be indented and have a bigger font and that sort of thing. And these are kind of up to you as well. So you can, as you're writing, if you know that you're working with a particular game engine, or for example, you wanted to show a character's portrait while they're saying something, you can add metadata and that sort of thing. But really what we're talking about is just pure story in Ink, which I think is fine. So as you can see, there's nothing else to this. It's about sectioning and making links and that sort of thing. But really, an Ink story, if you can write a story, you can write an Ink story. And I think that's also true of Twine. Anyway, what we're going to do today is I thought we would go through a couple of really, really rapid examples. So last time round, we only had half the session to do the practical stuff. So I had to rattle through one example very, very fast. Now, I think Twine lends itself to particular kinds of experiences really naturally. So last week we did a dungeon crawler, because what interactive fiction writer wouldn't want to write a dungeon crawler, of course. It's like the Times New Roman of interactive fiction. However, Ink, I find a little bit more flexible because it is just text and hyperlinks, and you're reading top to bottom as you would on a page. I feel like it lends itself to you writing different kinds of stories. And I've used Ink to make quizzes. I've used it to make all dialogue scenes. I've used it to make prototypes and all sorts of other stuff. And so what we're going to do is I might show you the examples first, just so you've got an idea of what we're going to try and build. Then the aim is that we're going to keep them quite simple just to demonstrate various features of Ink. Obviously, I'm conscious of the fact that we've not got ages. This workshop is going to be like an hour and a bit. And I've already waffled through 17 minutes of it. So just to kind of show you first, what we're going to do is, don't worry about reading it in any detail at the moment. Oh, my broken MacBook is so slow. There we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to make a quiz. So this is going to be simply a bit of text with 4 options that you can click, just to give you an idea of what the structure looks like. And so I think this was a millionaire question. And the idea this is just to show you kind of what the sections look like, how to make things clickable, how to answer things, or yada, yada. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a slightly more complicated version of this, because what Ink allows you to do is do things like loop. So you can come back to the same scenes and it will get rid of the things that you've clicked, or it will include text in different places depending on what you want to do. Then we're going to do a decidedly non-violent Russian roulette, which will be a good chance to look at variables and random numbers and that sort of thing. So Ink is quite programmatic. So if you want to choose a random number and then display different text or options depending on what it picks, that's a great thing to do. So as you can see here, there's a little bit of code, but what we get is a game where you can pull the trigger. And so I immediately lost. But yeah, so it's a non-violent take on Russian roulette. And the reason for this is we talked last time around one of the things that interactive fiction gives you, other than just story, is state. And state is really important in terms of understanding what I've done, how many times I've done it, what I've seen, what I'm holding, who I've spoken to, all of that stuff, you know. So variables are really, and state is a really important concept. And then I'm going to close this. And the final one we're going to look at is, of course, a dungeon crawler. And what I wanted to do was quickly replicate what we did last time in Twine. So for those of you that missed it, what we did was we made a tiny Twine game where you're standing in a room with a door and a key. The door is locked until you pick the key up. And it's just about kind of understanding how the systems work in terms of telling the game that I'm holding the key, printing different text to the character depending on whether or not they're holding the key. Because once you learn these in a really simple environment, you can then go, oh, I've got this big whizzy thing that I want to build, and Dan has taught me the building blocks, and that's the plan anyway. Okay, so just for completeness, I'll show you the dungeon one as well. This one's a bit more complex, but again, still not loads. And for those of you who did the Twine one, you should be able to see the text is kind of similar. If I go to different things, I get the wrong response, I can grab the key, the game knows, blah, 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 blah. Ink is also really good in terms of the editor lends itself very well to experimentation. So as we're working, you can go, oh, I want to try something else. I'm going to go back a step, click the other thing. I'm going to reset the entire game, click through again, blah, blah, blah. So it's similar to how Twine will let you go back, but this is kind of as you're writing. So the game is kind of playable constantly as you're updating the text, which I think is really, really powerful. Right, I'm just going to quickly, just to avoid blowing your minds, I'm just going to share my editor and then I can keep everything separate just so you've got a nice focus on what we're going to do. Before I dig in, is all of this kind of making sense? Is there anything anyone's not sure about before we do a 2-footed jump into the vortex of Ink? Renee, is that a thumbs up or is that that's not a question, is it? I don't know what Zoom etiquette is. Is that just, that's just a
thumbs up. Yeah, I meant thumbs up, yeah. Thanks.
Okie dokie, cool. Right, so I'm going to share just my editor. Live demo. And I've made this nice and large, so everybody should be able to see it. And your faces are in the way of my notes. So I'm going to move your actual faces out of the way. Okay, so can you still see that? I've just moved it around. I'm assuming that's okay. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is make a little quiz. And the aim of this is just to show you how to make clickable stuff in Ink. And this is the kind of fundamental thing. It's similar to Twine. The most important thing about Twine is figuring out how to make things clickable so you can move around it, okay? Ink is really nice because you don't need to do anything in order to start a story. Whereas with Twine, you needed a node in the middle. You need to give it a name. You need to faff around, and that's all fine. but we can start doing whatever we like. So I'm gonna I'm just gonna copy and paste some of this stuff just to avoid typing it and to keep things snappy, but please feel free to adapt this as you're going. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna simply put a little quiz question. Which insect shorted out an early supercomputer and inspired the same computer bug? Which of course we know the answer. Do we know the answer? Does anyone know the answer without cheating? And it was a $1 million question on Millionaire, apparently. I just Googled. So it was, in fact, a moth. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a load of buttons, one of which will be correct, the correct answer that you can click, and 3 of them will be incorrect. And obviously, although this is a quiz question, you could completely use this for doors or dialogue choices or whatever. So there are a couple of things about making ink options. And this is kind of where it begins to sing, because they're a bit smarter than just links, okay? So the simplest way to do things is we make a plus sign. You can kind of treat it like bullet points almost, really. So we're going to make a plus sign, and then in brackets, we're going to, if you remember the swine thing, we said, oh, the first part is going to be what the user sees, like the name of the link, and then the second part is going to be where it goes. Ink is kind of similar in the sense that I'm going to put an option here, so roach. And that'll be the actual label of the button, dead easy. And then we're going to do a little arrow. So that's, again, non-programmers, you might not have used a square, pointy bracket, arrow bracket. I don't know. I've been programming 15 years and I still don't know what the right term for a pointy arrow bracket is. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to write the word wrong. Now, wrong is going to be the name of where we go if you click that button. Okay, so essentially what Ink does in its simplest form is allow you to go to different arbitrary sections in your code. Now, programmers, you might have encountered go-tos before, which is just a way of sort of putting your program into a different place. Now, what's cool about this is, as you can see, I've started typing, and every time I type, this part on the right-hand side updates, which is really, really useful because you've constantly got a live playable version of the thing that you are creating. And what it means is that things like mistakes and errors become very, very obvious and very apparent. And so you don't have that kind of write tons and tons of code, then play it, blah, blah, blah. You can kind of micro check all the time. And the workflow for Ink is really nice because you can kind of do this quite quickly and you almost miss out a step, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is, just for completeness, I'm going to copy and paste this whole line. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to put some answers in of fly. The other one? I don't know. Beal, whatever. So at the moment, they're all wrong answers. And I think this is quite a good test initially. So what we'll do is we'll make them all wrong. And then once that works, we'll make one of them correct. Okay. So what we're doing is we're pressing one of these buttons and we're going to a section called wrong. Now, I think Ink calls these knots, but really they're just sections. They're like headings that you can jump to basically, and you just jump around at any point. So although Ink starts from the top, so line 1 is always the first thing you'll see. Once you start, you can jump around. You could have sections all over the place with lots of different names. In the same way as Twine, you can have boxes and lines all over the place. It's kind of down to you, really. And the way we do this is we do... Oh, has someone got a question? Or is that just ambient noise?
Come here.
So the way we do it is really, really easy. Is we do 2 equal signs.
What are you doing down there?
I think someone needs to maybe mute. Anyway, we do 2 equal signs and then the name of our section or our knot, and then another 2 equal signs. And what this is doing is it's telling Ink that this is a point you can jump to. And then for now, I'm just going to go wrong, you idiot. And that'll be it. Okay. Now, all we want to do here is the only thing you need to add in Ink is you need to tell Ink when your story is finished. And by yeah, we'll do an end. So you can either do end or you can do done. I think they do the same thing. I think it's just a way of telling Ink that your program is done and you're finished, because otherwise you end up at a dead end or a loose end, which is not what you want. So I'm going to write done, and you do it with the same arrow that you did before. So it's a minus character and then a little pointy thing. And you can write done or end in capital letters. Now, again, for non-programmers, you can tell you've done this correctly because it highlights properly. So you can see it's turned blue. Like if I just start typing any old rubbish. Oh, okay, it does it anyway, but it should do. So the highlighting generally means you've done it right. So if it detects that the syntax is correct. Okay, and we can play this at the moment. So what we've got is you can see top to bottom, we go, oh, here's my question. It's now presenting me with 4 answers. And if I click any of them at the moment, we're going to go to wrong. And at that point, it's going to jump here and then print the first text that it can see. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So we're going to demo it live. We can just press it and it goes wrong, you idiot. And then it's detected that we've written done, end of story. Okay, so the next thing to do is clearly one of these answers needs to be right. So we can straight away, and again, these names can be anything. I think, again, it's probably best practice to not have spaces. So I tend to use, you know, it could be wrong answer or whatever. I tend to use underscores and things. I don't think spaces are generally a bad idea. But I'm just going to use wrong and right. But again, I'll send out some samples of my longer form writing, and you can see that the names of scenes and things are quite descriptive, because you really naming things is kind of one of the hardest things in computer science and writing. And naming your sections, so you as a writer can go back to them and go, oh, I instinctively know what happens in this scene or this section, is a really good skill to get right. So we know this one is right, so I'm going to turn this one to right, and then I'm going to copy this whole block. Now, copying and pasting is a great idea. You don't need to type everything out all the time. Who's got the time? And we're going to change this to right. And at this point, oh my God, you're a millionaire, whatever. So the least exciting quiz ever. Okay, so now what we can do is, because we are in Inky, so just to clarify, Ink is the name of this language and this environment we're using. Inky is the application that we're typing in. So this little app, the text editor, but Ink is the kind of the language. And then confusingly, Inkle is the name of the company that made the whole thing and open sourced it. So when we talk about Ink, Ink is the main kind of language that we're talking about. So because we're here, we can hit this button. So this button with one arrow just goes back one stage, which is a really handy thing. You know, if you're writing something that's got a few options and you just want to test out how they work, great. It might be that you want to reset the entire thing and go right back to the start. So now you can see we're right back at the start. And if I hit moth, we now go to the right one. Oh my God, you're a millionaire. Isn't that exciting? That exciting? It's not exciting, isn't it? So the last thing we want to do really is, I tend to want to have like a payoff at the end. So either way, you've answered, you've got your answer saying, hey, you're wrong, hey, you're right. And then what we're going to do is we can use the same syntax as here, and we can add a new scene just finished, which I might put something that says, say, thanks for playing. You know, either way, whether you are a millionaire now or not, I think we should finish it off. So what we'll do is we can do finished game, for example, and we'll copy that into this one. So that arrow syntax is really prevalent in Ink, and it just means go to this place, go here. And it's a really, really quick way of kind of, it's like a shorthand kind of skip. And again, one thing that Inkle does really well, because I'm pointing at something called finished game, but I've not made the section yet. When I start typing, you can see that it gives you a little autocomplete thing. So programmers, you'll have seen this a million times, and you hit enter and it will fill it in for you. So the less you can type this stuff, the less likely it is that you'll make a typo. Because if obviously I write, I don't know, an extra character or something, it won't find it. And that's when you kind of get bugs and stuff. So the more you can let the tools help you, the better, really. And then what you can say is, thanks for playing, hooray. And you can put your done at the end. Okay, so now we've got either way, we're going to go here or we're going to go here, and both of them are then going to go, thanks for playing. Okay, so that's the kind of model for flow really in Ink. One thing to note, so programmers, again, you'll understand that white space and the gaps between things can be anything. This isn't about like, it doesn't care what the layout is. If you've not done this kind of thing before, it might be that you want to put extra space between the sections, for example. And again, this is just for you, just for your purposes. I often put lots and lots of space between things just so I can see the blocks are separate. It's perfectly fine to have everything kind of squashed together. But obviously, if you look at that visually, it's a lot more difficult to kind of get your head around. So a lot of this is about kind of putting a bit of space in and that sort of thing. Anyone who's done any code, you can also do comments. Comments are great. So you do 2 slashes and go blah, 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 blah. This is stuff just for you. So if you've not coded before, a comment is just a little bit of stuff that you can put into your code that's just for the person reading the code, and the actual program is ignored. It doesn't come into your game at all. So for example, you might write, this is a cool scene, blah, blah, blah. Or you could write, I don't know, to do, finish this. which is something that is prevalent all over my code. So does that kind of make sense? I know this is a bit really whistle-stop kind of tour, but really what we're talking about is this is how you make buttons, these are diverts, and this is a section or a knot. I think they're called knots. If you read the Ink documentation, they call them knots. But you can get quite far just doing this stuff, really. Now, the second example, I'm actually just going to change this just to give you an idea. So there's a couple of things that we can mess with here that will unlock possibilities in your work. Now, the first one is that I quite like that Ink allows you to leave the text on the screen. So, for example, if you were in the chair being asked a quiz, when you select an answer, you might say it out loud, okay? So you might, if you're in your game, will probably want that dialogue to stay on the screen. You know, if I say the word roach or whatever my answer is, rather than just pressing it and that disappearing, I would want to press it and have it stay on the screen. And so what you can do is, I'm going to put quote marks around these just to denote to the player that this is a spoken reply. And again, this could be dialogue that you're writing or whatever you're using. Now, so currently, if you look, these square brackets surround the response. But if you get rid of those square brackets, what happens is it also prints that. Oops, it prints that to the screen. So, for example, if I click moth because it's in square brackets, it doesn't. Nothing. It's not there, and you click it, but it's not part of the text, part of the story. Whereas I've changed these two. So if I say roach, it will add it, and then I think you can put a line break underneath it or whatever. Does that make sense? So it's kind of about what you include and don't include. So I think, do you put a line break maybe? I think that's how you do it. So maybe line breaks are important, can't they? Yeah, there you go. Okay, so this doesn't seem very much, but actually is really, really useful because you can do quite a lot of other stuff with text, depending on how you're talking or what the variables are or whatever. So it's worth bearing in mind that if you want to include something, remove those square brackets and everything will work. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you very, very quickly, which I really, really like, is that imagine, and again, this will come up and I'll send you an example of this. Sometimes you'll want to revisit the same scene and let people have another try. And to give you some context, I wrote a scene in Closed Hands that was an interview scene where a journalist is interviewing a panel, and there's 4 different questions you can ask. But what I wanted the player to be able to ask all 4 questions. So in the example that we've got here, once we've chosen an answer, we're done. We can't choose another one because we either are wrong and the game finishes, or we're right and the game finishes. So a better way to do this would be going, okay, well, if I'm wrong, I want to be able to try again and ask again. Okay. So what we can do is we've already got enough tools to do this. Now, what we want to do is these bits here are kind of sections because we've got a title here and a header. But this bit here at the top, we just go straight into, and actually we don't that's not necessarily what we want. What we want to do is maybe call this section questions, and then we can go back to it. Now it has a name, we can revisit it again. Okay. Now you'll see that as soon as I put this mark here, my story doesn't do anything. And the reason is that the story won't automatically go to this section unless you tell it to, okay? And you can see we've already got this syntax here. We've got an arrow and a name. We need to tell Ink to go to questions, okay? So what we can do is we can just put that at the top. So when you start this story, it knows to go to questions. And as soon as I type that, it will then hit the questions, okay? So I'm gonna go back to the start of this game. So this now currently will look exactly the same. So the missing piece of the puzzle now is when I get one wrong, I don't want to finish the game. I want to go back to the questions. Does that make sense? So we can change this to questions. So now, if I get the right answer, we finish. Super great, I'm a millionaire. But if we get the wrong question, we go back to questions. So roach, wrong. And then we go back to the question. Now, the final thing that Ink lets you do is it lets you get rid of the thing you've already tried. And again, this is something that you could do with Twine, but it's a bit of a pain, that kind of thing. Whereas Twine is expressly designed to let you do this kind of thing. And all you need to do, now this is, I love this kind of thing, just a tiny little syntax tweak will make the feel and the meaning of your scene different. So when you get something wrong, if you've got 4 answers and you get something wrong, you're not going to choose the same thing again. So it follows that you're going to want to eliminate that from the list, right? And in the same way, my interview question thing in a real game is that it's a big long piece of work, and you go back to the questions, but the player can't ask the same question again, because in real life you wouldn't want to. Okay, so all you need to do is the plus sign here, that's kind of like a bullet point. If you just change to an asterisk, so that's kind of I was going to say Asterix, but he's the French Viking, isn't he? I always do that. So if we change these, that tells Ink only display this once, and when you've clicked it, don't display it again. So now if we go back to the start, it will say, oh, I'm going to press Roach, and when I've clicked it, it will say wrong, you idiot. And now we go back to questions, and you'll see that Roach has been removed. And then eventually, so obviously you could have a really terrible night and you choose wrong again. 2 left, you're going to choose wrong again, and then finally you have no option but to kind of choose the correct answer. And so this structure, it really, so you can even with just this simple structure of, oh, I know how to make a button and I know how to make a section, what you're doing is replicating Twine in text very, very quickly, I think, anyway. Is that making sense to everybody? Is anyone not following any of this? I know, and I appreciate I'm rattling through at light speed. No? Great, cool, okay. So what we're going to do next is, so that's this sort of building blocks, the really foundational building blocks, okay? Now, what the interactive fiction is partially about structure and partially about state. And state is one of those things where you can write a perfectly good and very deep and very involved piece of interactive fiction just by going door A, door B, option A, option B, dialogue choice A, dialogue choice B. Fine, you can go absolutely nuts with this stuff. But Ink is interesting because, and Twine to a certain extent, is that it maintains a state. And so I might want to know whether I'm holding the key. I might want to know whether I've asked too many questions. I might want to know whether I've punched the goblin enough times to deplete its health points to 0. I might want to, you know what I mean? Because interactive fiction has a state, the options and the possibilities suddenly become massive. And you will play, and I'll send loads of examples out for these, you'll play games that will maintain very, very complex states. So for example, I'm working on a sci-fi story, just a personal project at the moment, where you're in communication with 5 different people on the same spaceship, trapped on a wayward course out of the galaxy. And they have relationships with each other and with you as a player. And that is all captured and saved as a state. And so if you have a particular conversation with one person, the numbers that denote the way they feel about you and feel about the other players, the other characters, will change. And therefore, when you speak to other characters, we know what the state of the game is, and the whole thing will change. And so having state, it elevates your story into a playable rather than a readable, and that's the distinction, really. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to do a couple of examples that just show you how to talk about variables and state and kind of various things. Again, Ink goes quite deep. You can do loads of really, really cool shit with Ink. We're going to scratch the surface here, and if that's enough of a jumping off point, then great, because Ink's community is brilliant and their documentation is also fantastic, which is good. Obviously, the best thing in software is good documentation, and it's been written by people who write stories as well as code, which is perfect. So I'm just going to show it you again. In fact, you know what? I'm not going to show it you again. Screw it. Let's just jump in. So I'm just going to find this one. Okay. So what we're going to do is, I showed you the Russian roulette structure before, and the aim of this is just to give you an idea of how variables work. So we're just going to introduce a variable that's just a number. So for those of you, again, who have joined, you don't understand what a variable is. A variable is like a named piece of data. So if I was a piece of code, I would have a variable called my name, and it would have a value of Dan, or I would have a variable of my age, and it would have a number I'm not going to disclose, that kind of thing. So this is named ways of interacting with data, whether it's numbers, lists of things, strings, whatever. Programmers, sorry, I'm teaching you how to suck eggs at this point. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a tiny game that uses a number. And it's going to be a random number because obviously we need some unpredictability sometimes. And again, there's tons of ways you can do this. You can compare numbers and make new numbers and that sort of thing. So for example, you could make something that has health points and magic points. You could make something that the sky is the limit, really. But for today, we're just going to do random numbers and a number of attempts on something. So Russian roulette, for those of you who don't understand the reference, is the oldie kind of old school thing where you've got a spinning pistol with 6 possible bullets in it, and one of them will shoot and the rest are blanks. We're going to do a very non-violent one where you get a comedy message out of the thing just to show what happens with a 1 in 6 chance. That's how it used to work. So I'm going to share my screen again. So I appreciate I'm hopping in and out of screens at the moment. So live demo. Brilliant. I'm just going to delete this entire thing. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do an intro bit of text. So I'm going to copy this in because you don't want to ask. All right. You hold the pistol up and pull the trigger nervously. Oh my goodness, this is tense already, right? And then we're going to pull the trigger. So again, we want this to always be present on the screen. So the button is going to be called pull the trigger. We're going to add a few dots for dramatic emphasis. And then we're going to go to a scene called pull trigger. So the scene that we go to is going to be the one that figures out the random number and decides whether we're going to go click or you're going to go bang. Okay, so pull trigger. And again, you can see I've used an underscore. So if I do pull space trigger, so for those of you who don't understand what syntax highlighting looks like, you can see here we've got 2 things. The first is that this part isn't blue because I've put a space in by accident. It's just to show you that ink doesn't like spaces. And also this editor in particular is great that if it detects a line with a mistake in it, you get this red kind of line. And that's a really common feature of code editors, but it's very handy. So if I delete the space, it goes, hey, that's valid now. Brilliant. And then of course, because it knows that we've written something called pull trigger, if we start to make a section, as soon as I type the first character, it goes, oh, you probably mean this, don't you? And I can press enter and it writes it in for me. So I'm not going to make any typo mistakes. Now, what we want to do here is we want to add a little tiny bit of maths to say, right, we're going to roll the dice and the number is going to come out between 1 and 6. And if it's 1, we're going to go bang. And if it's anything else, we're going to go click and we don't die. Okay. And so there's loads of ways you could do this. But for me, conceptually, I tend to describe this kind of thing as a dice roll. You know, if you're not a code person, then this is probably the best metaphor. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a little bit of syntax that just does this calculation and prints 2 different bits of text depending on whether or not we've rolled a 1 or not, because you want a 1 in 6 chance of perishing. So what we're going to do, and I'm just going to paste this in just so you've got a bit more time to copy it. Let me paste in the empty thing. I don't know what the best way to do this is it to type it out? Yeah, do you know what? Let's just type it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a curly brace. Now, curly braces, programmers, you'll understand where they are. They're next to your enter keys. They're on. I think there should be the same keys on Windows as your normal brackets. So it's a curly brace. And then in capital letters, we're going to write the word random. And random is basically telling ink to pick a random number. And we want a random number between 1, 6. Okay. So what we're saying is we're asking ink to give us a random number because we're going to act on this. Okay. And this could be anything. These can be tiny numbers or whole numbers or whatever else. And again, if this stuff doesn't make total sense to you, the documentation is quite good. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an equals 1. So what we're saying is if this random number is exactly equal to 1, we want to do something. And in any other state, we don't want to do anything. Okay. And then the last thing we want to add is a little colon. Now, if you notice, that's all black. And as soon as I put the colon here, it goes, oh, that's valid. It's gone green. And it's to tell you that this is something that is going to do something, but it's for you, the developer. It's not. So this won't be visible to the end user. This is just a calculation we're going to do under the hood to roll the dice and decide what we're going to display to the player. Okay. So that, just to reiterate, that clause is saying if a random number between 1 and 6 is definitely equal to 1, so a 1 in 6 chance every time the player gets to this scene, on a new line, we can then write some text. So that's the only bit of code, and then we can just write what we want to do. So this is kind of our losing state. So I'm going to write a small note on fills. I cannot type at all when I'm on Zooms. It's very, very difficult in my line of work. And fills from the gun. It reads bang. And then I'm going to put a button underneath just to progress the game. And it's just going to say, oh dear. And then I'm going to write, let's have a look. What did I put last time? Play again. So again, I tend to put a play again scene just so you can loop back to the start and have another go. And the reason for that is just continuity, so you don't get stuck in a dead end. Play again. And what we could do is we could end it there, but I think so all we've got is a losable game, but we need a win state. So currently, if the number is 1, bang, you lose. In any other scenario, so if it's any other number from 2 to 5, then we can click and we live to fight another day, right? So what we can do is underneath, we can do, so, and you can see it doesn't it automatically goes, oh, there should be something here. So you kind of Ink keeps track of what you're doing. So then we can do else. So you do a little minus, else. And again, you can see that as soon as you put that colon in, it goes, hey, great, you've done something correct. We can do click. You survived. I don't know, survived this round. I mean, you survive anyway because it's not a real gun, but let's not worry about the semantics. And then we can put another one. So in this instance, you want to pull the trigger again, right? You want to, so like really, you want to keep pulling the trigger. I guess, I don't know. This isn't a very realistic game. So what we can do is pull the trigger again. Okay. Now, what happens here is we're sort of recursively going to call this scene because we're already in the scene where you pull the trigger. So you can do a link to the scene that we're currently in. So we're in pull trigger at the moment. And actually what we want to do is hit this scene again and roll that dice again. So all you need to do is do your arrow and then do pull trigger. Okay. So we're going to either win and we're going to go to another scene, or in this case, you're just going to keep looping here until something happens that isn't this, okay? And then the final thing we need to do is we want to put a curly brace here. So the opening curly brace here is the one that way. And then the one underneath is, oh, what does it not like? What? That's the problem. That's weird. Let's see what it says. Oh, hang on, yeah, so that's good. We've learned something here. So I was trying to figure, I thought I'd written something wrong. And the reason is I've written, this one goes to a scene called play again, but as you can tell, I've not written it yet. So that's actually quite handy. So that's done something that I would expect. So let's just quickly do that again. So we're gonna make it to the scene underneath, 2 equal signs, play again. And then you can add a button that says, I don't know. Play again. Let's pay again. Play again. So the last thing we need to do is, and again, if you remember last time, I just started writing at the top. So this needs a little divert at the top. So we're going to call this start game. Start game. This is going to go to start game. And remember, the final thing is that unless we tell Ink to go there first, it's not going to begin the game. Okay, so we can do a little arrow, same as last time. Start game. Okay, so now, so just to go back over this, so we start at the beginning. It tells us to go to start game. It prints this to the user. You hold the pistol up and pull the trigger nervously. We get a button, and then we go to here. So let's just see if this works. So we pull the trigger. It rolls the dice. So that wasn't 1, so we live to fight another day, and you can keep doing it. Very slow here. Sorry, the laptop is absolutely terrible. So statistically, I'm doing quite well here, really. Wait, I'm doing very, very well. What's going on here? What do you think? Is it broken? Shouldn't be. I think I'm just very lucky today. Oh yeah, there you go. I think I was just incredibly lucky the first time. Right, so so we've just learned something else about randomness, is that randomness is actually a pain in the ass because randomness isn't particularly random sometimes. So yeah, something to watch out for. Is it a bug, or am I just having a great day at Russian roulette? So we've got this, it works pretty great, but we can do something else with variables. So one thing I wanted to show you was this here is making a little number. It's like a little local number that we just need to know now. We're not going to do anything with it later. But what we could do is, for example, we might want to tell the player, and this is a cool thing actually, because I've just done one. How many times did I survive? Like 8 times. It could be that we want to tell the player how many times they've survived, or, you know, you might want to print health points or whatever, you know. So what we can do is we can make numbers that are more permanent. So this one we use and we go, right, is it between 1 and 6? And then we throw it away because we don't need it. But we can make a more permanent variable. For example, the number of times I've survived, the number of times we've gone click. So I appreciate this is quite a morbid example, but we're going to roll with it. Now, what's cool about this is in Twine, you've got stuff all over the place in variables, in scenes, and all sorts of things. And we had a bit of discussion last week about going, well, actually, it's maybe not good programming practice to have stuff hidden away and yada yada. Ink is a bit more similar to code in the sense that you can put your variables at the top of a file and go, okay, well, here's a bunch of stuff that the game needs to know about in order for us to work with it. So we can go right to the top and we can make a new number. So we're going to make a number that just tracks how many times we've successfully gone click and survived, just so we can tell the player, hey, you survived 3 rounds. This is great. So what we're going to do is we're going to call it, I don't know. So you need to write var in capital letters for variable. And we're going to call it, so you can call it anything you like. Again, I have this I teach hundreds of workshops. People, I cannot stress the need to name things correctly. And so often you get people naming their variables A or Steve or whatever. You can name this whatever you like, but remember that the more complicated your program gets, the more important it is that you name things correctly, whether it's a scene or a variable or whatever else. It has to be named something that is going to make sense. So we're going to call this times survived. And currently it's going to be 0 because we've not played yet. I haven't survived it yet. I'm 0. Okay. And every time we survive, we're going to add 1 to that number, and we're going to spit it back to the player. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that at the start of the game that variable is always 0. Okay. So what we can do is we can do a little just a little double check to make sure that we're resetting that number, because when we go back to the start of the game, it has to be 0 again because we're starting again. Okay. So the way to tell it that we're going to mess with something is you put a little tilde. So on a Mac, it's next to your left shift key. On a Windows keyboard, anybody?
It's in the extreme upper left under the escape key.
Fantastic.
Next to the 1.
So, oh yeah, yes, that's where your tilde is. I love the word tilde. So we're going to put a little tilde, and then we can change things. So we're going to write times survived equals 0, and it's just making sure that, because what we don't want to do is survive 5 times, then go back to the start, and then it still has that 5. We want to make sure it's 0. Okay, does that make sense? So the next thing we want to do is we want to go into here, because when we survive, we want to add 1 to that number. And again, we can go do our little tilde, and all that's doing is telling Ink that we're going to mess with some data, and we don't want to print it to the player. We just want to mess with it. So we can now do times survived. I think we can just do, well, I'll tell you what we'll do is, for non-programmers, what we really want to do is we're going to do times survived equals times survived, so the current number plus 1. So what we're saying is basically add 1 to the current number. And again, programmers, sorry, I know this is foundational, but it's very important we teach people. So times survived, blah, 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 blah. So at the moment, we can play this and it will do what we need. So every time I survive, it's adding 1 to that number. Okay, so time survive is now 1, but the user doesn't know about it. So the final thing we want to do is we want to tell the user how many times they survive, because now we're tracking that number. We want to spit it back out into the thing, right? So what we can do is we can go, we can add it into our text. So at the moment, we're just saying you survived this round, but what we can change this to is you survived times survived rounds. Okay, so those curly braces with the variable name in will basically print the value of that variable. And as you can see, if I then run this again, so again, I'm just profusely apologizing if I'm swamping anyone who's not got programming stuff in their head yet. It's worth a practice. You'll get it. So we pull the trigger. Of course, we lose immediately when I want to demo the thing. So we're going to try again. So we survived 1 round. Of course, programmer-wise, it should be round instead of rounds, and you'd probably put a bit of logic in there if you were being thorough. I don't care though. And so obviously we're increasing, yada, 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 yada. So yeah, really, really simple system. But again, once you get your head around this stuff, the sky's the limit, because immediately you've got a chance to mess with numbers in your game. And so this could be health points, this could be feelings, this could be attempts, this could be questions, this could be anything, it could be currency. And you can make very, very complicated games just using branching pathways and a bit of state, really. And so you can use different data types in here. So although we're talking about numbers, You can also input strings and that kind of thing. So you could make up random names. You could ask the user for input. You can kind of track, items. You can make an inventory, that kind of thing. And in fact, the next demo we make is going to be the final demo we're going to make is going to be, it's going to use variables to denote what the player is currently holding and whether or not we can do things depending on what we're holding. Okay. Have I lost anybody in this ramble so far? Is this making sense to particularly non-programmers? I appreciate there's a lot going on here. It's making a bit of sense to you. Cool. Okay, great. Right. So the final one we're going to do, and I'm trying to pack as much as possible into this whistle stop tour of Ink, is a little tiny dungeon crawler. Now, I just wanted to quickly show this a second time, just so you've got an idea. I think it's going to be useful to talk about what we're actually building. Now, this is a little bit more of an involved example. Oh, it's open twice. I wonder what happens if you open things twice. Probably fine. So yeah, I wanted to just specifically show you this, just so we've got an idea of what we're trying to build. So what we're going to do is, you can see a few things in here. We've got some branching pathways, same as we've done. And we've got a little bit of checking to see variables, and we've got variables at the top. And you can see that I've put some comments in just as a reflex almost. So sometimes comments are, very, very handy for when you're returning to projects. If you're working with other people, comments are really, really useful. So that's the kind of thing that's a really handy tool, particularly if you're new to this as well. So we're going to start at the beginning. And in fact, do you know what? I might just, for those who missed the first session, explain. Oh, I'm on the wrong computer. I can't show you the one we made in the last. I got it. I think it has. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, we have. Great, cool. Sorry, I'm talking to myself at this point, aren't I? Yeah, so just for clarity, just as a refresher to those who did it last week, our dungeon crawler looked very similar to this thing. So we're going to replicate this. And what we've got is our 3 sections. Our first section is when, in fact, we'll play it. You're standing in a room. Simplest possible expression of video game. You're standing in a room. In front of you is a door. In the corner of the room is an extremely interesting plant pot. And if you open the door, you're not currently holding the key. So it will say the door is locked. And it seems like such a simple thing, but it's a really simple way of showing you that the state matters. And obviously this could be very complicated. And so it will say, hey, you haven't got the key. I've checked the variable. I haven't got it. So we're going to do the only other thing we can do in this simple game. Look under the plant pot. Oh my God, there's a key. Who saw that coming? Now we can try the door, and the key works. The door swings open, and then we can play again. And then that's expressed through these 3 scenes. So we've got starting part, the bit where you look for the key, and the bit where you try the door. And you can see, like last time round, we did a bit of if else. So structurally, very, very similar. So we've said if we've got the key, we're going to print all this to the player, then we can play again. Else we've not got the key, so we're going to do this, this, and this. So what we're going to do is replicate this in Ink. And I think it's a really good exercise to have both available to you, just so you've got an idea of how structurally things fit together. And I'm not going to show you my Twitter. It's ridiculous. So I'm going to show you just the editor again. I'm very aware I'm hopping in and out of windows. I apologize for nothing. Right, live demo. Okay, cool. Oh, we got some questions. I heard a little zoomy noise. Chat. Oh, no, okay. Oh, Anne's had to drop out. No worries. Okay, right, let's press on. So I'm going to delete everything in live demo, and we're going to go from the top. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to tell the player where they are. So remember, and again, for those of you who missed it, we want to write in second person, more or less. I mean, Closed Hands was in third person, where we talk about characters, but classic dungeon crawler, we don't say Dan is standing in a room or I am standing in a room. We're going to say you are standing. This is an adventure we're writing for somebody else to play. And for those of you who've written before, writing in second person is quite a weird cognitive leap, because you don't really, and we talked about this extensively in the first lesson, you don't really get second person novels or writing. It just doesn't make sense. But in games, it makes perfect sense, because what you're doing is you're writing something for somebody else to experience and play. And that's one of the things that really makes interactive fiction so powerful. So we're going to write, you are standing in a dungeon room for some reason. There is a door here. Of course, there's a door here. How you got into the room originally, we don't know. There's, and we're going to be lazy, a key on the table, whatever, you know, we're not trying to make a very complicated game here. Okay, so we've gotten straight into the whole thing. This is a good chance to practice making some buttons. There's only two things you can do here. You can either try the door or you can check the key. So we can write one of these. So remember, it's a plus sign to say, well, this is like a bullet point of a button. Try the door. Now, the language that we use is important as well. So what we aren't going to write unlock the door. We aren't going to write open the door, because we don't know if the player is carrying the key. So the words, so it's worth thinking really carefully about the way you describe things, because so when you're writing a story or a novel or whatever, you understand what the flow is and you know what's happened before. Whereas the language you choose for this kind of scenario where the state can change, you need to treat that as, you need to be kind of non-committal with your language almost. So we're going to write try the door because we don't know when they hit that button whether or not they're carrying the key. So and again, I'm going to name the scene the same because again, we want things to match. I want to at a glance understand what the scenes are. So we're going to go right, try the door. So we can then go, oh, we know the other option is going to be to pick up the key. So we can paste that in and like pick up the key. Okay. And again, I'm using underscores. So we'll make these scenes. Which one should we do first? Yeah, we'll do the key first. So again, our sections are just two equal signs. Pick up the key. You pick up the key. Dynamite stuff, this, of course. So we pick up the key. We haven't done any variables yet. What we're going to do is we're just making the structure and then we're going to put the clever stuff in. Okay, you pick up the key, fantastic. And then the try the door is the other one. So try, and again, we don't want to type, so try the door. So we're going to need to put a bit of structuring in here, don't we? Because we need the game to know whether or not we have the key. So what we need to do is, firstly, we're going to make a variable. And the last example and this example, I'm putting them at the top. Now, they can be anywhere in Ink, and in most programming languages, it doesn't really matter. Typically, and this is just a programming thing, you really want your variables to be as local as possible. So if you're going to use them all over the place, like in this example, it makes no sense to have them at the top because it tells you or another reader, oh, here's a bunch of stuff that this game needs. Okay, so we're going to make a var, so variable in capital letters, got key. Now, at the start of this game, we have not got the key. We know this to be a fact, so we can set it to false. So non-programmers, this is a Boolean value, it's called, and it's either true or false. And it's a really good way of saying, is this thing happening or not? Is it a thing or not? Do I have it or not? And it's not, there's no maybe, it's just a 1 or a 0, true or false. Okay, so we have not got the key when we start the game because that would ruin the game. Ruin an already arguably terrible game. So you pick up the key. So what we want to do is, again, you should know how to do this actually. So last time round, we had the little tilde character and we messed with numbers. We're going to do exactly the same thing here. So we can put it anywhere in this section. So we're always going to be false. So we can do a little tilde and we can go got key equals true. Hooray, much rejoicing. The world is our oyster. So you pick the key up and now we know that the only thing we can do is try the door. So we can stick a button in here, exactly the same. And in fact, we can just lift this thing wholesale. So often you will have scenes that, like, depending on how you structure your game, you'll have scenes that do the same thing. You might end up in 3 different places, all of which then go to the same final scene. Nothing wrong with copying and pasting. I do it all the time. So we'll stick that in there, try the door. So this scene is now done because you can only hit it once and we're going to pick up the key. Okay, so where the magic happens is that we want to check that value and say, okay, I've either got the key or not, and I want to tell the player 2 different things. Okay, so again, we're going to do a little curly braces. Now, one hot tip for anyone learning programming, and it seems like a really obvious thing, but one of the most common errors you'll encounter is you're missing braces or missing brackets. So if I type a load of stuff in, but I don't put the opposite bracket in, it won't, the code won't work, it won't compile, the computer doesn't know what you mean, doesn't know you finished. So I tend to, as a reflex, so last time round we started typing, but what I tend to do is hit enter a couple of times and then make the closing brace before I do anything else. And it means that there's less chance of you introducing bugs and errors where you're missing, because all you need to do is miss one curly brace and the whole program won't work, and nobody wants that. Okay, so what we can do is we can do got key And what it's basically doing is, this is a real nice sort of shorthand way for saying, is this true? So it's true or false. If it's true, do stuff. And then later on, we're going to do the opposite of that. So if you've got the key and you try the door, I'm going to paste this in because I just can't be bothered writing, and it's not a good use of our time. So I'm just going to paste this in, but you can write it later. You look at the door with the key in your pocket, you know what to do, right? Give it a whirl, and then you've got an option here to try the key, okay? And then what we'll do is we'll do another section here called door opens, and this is just our endpoint. So just to say the swings open, and then we can put a little at the end, okay? So that's our kind of win state for this really boring game, okay? So we've got a little check to say, have I got the key? In which case I can open the door, great. And then the last thing to do is to do the opposite of that. Now, it's a kind of weird syntax this, but what we can do is we can maybe copy and paste this whole thing. So again, if I want to make something do the opposite or do something similar but different, I don't necessarily think you need to write everything from scratch every time, okay? So I'm going to copy that entire block, and by block, I mean, so when programmers talk about blocks, it usually means the bits between the curly braces, okay? So I'm going to copy that entire thing, hit enter, and this first one is checking if I've got the key, but if I've not got the key, I want to do something else. And Inky is really good because you can just write the word not in front of it. So if I've not got the key, do something else. So again, I'm just going to copy and paste this because I just can't be bothered writing. So here, we're going to go, hey, I haven't got the key. It'll say, you try the door, it's locked. If only there was some kind of key. And at that point, we can link back to our pickup key. Does that make sense? So depending on which one you go to the other one, and that's all you need to do. So you've only got two options, okay? So let's give it a test. So we start the game. We have not got the key because we've set key to false. You're standing in a dungeon room, blah, 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 blah. So if we try the door, we have not got the key. You try the door, it's locked. If only there was some kind of key. And then you grab the key, and now you can try the door. So it knows kind of that you've got the key now. So now we go back to try the door, and got key is true. And so then we get this part and we give it a whirl. The door swings open and our story ends. And then if we reset the entire thing, we go back to the start. And the shorter version, we go, oh, I'm a smart adventurer. I'm going to pick up the key first, yada, 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 try the door. So it's a much easier route. And again, this stuff does seem quite simple, but once you've kind of got this in your head, the possibilities are just massive, really. And people use just so Close Hands was like a 1.5 to 2 year undertaking and it was basically a novel. I didn't use anything more complicated than this, and most of the scenes were less complicated than this. Then we just used it for text, and we had a little bit of state. So structurally, you can do a lot with a little. And although Ink does a lot of really, really, really clever stuff, the basics will get you. And I find that's true with most programming languages, most environments. It's sort of this 80-20 rule that people talk about quite a lot. You 20% of the knowledge will get you 80% of the way there. So if you can make branching pathways and a couple of variables, you can make pretty much anything if you're ambitious enough. And the rest of the complexity is just when you want to get really fancy or you want to make your life a little bit easier. But certainly just the stuff that I've shown you here, you can make an insane amount of stuff with so far. So what else was I going to quickly show you? Oh yeah, so the final question was, so last week we talked about how to share your games. So the world is your oyster with this stuff, and I'm sure you can go forth and make cool stuff, of course. But if you want to share this stuff, now Twine last time around, and I'm just going to stop sharing just that window. So Twine lets you output your games and mess with them visually. Like I said at the start, Ink is more about being an engine, and you plug it into other games, and you can plug it into other engines. However, you can also share your games really easily. So if I open up my dungeon, I guess one of the other differences between Ink and Twine is that Twine jumps from scene to scene, so it kind of scrubs everything on the page and then shows you the next page. That's cool. Ink is a little bit different in that it sticks everything at the bottom and it just keeps adding text to the bottom. So it's more of a story or more of a novel, I suppose. I mean, you can change it so it doesn't work like that, but the default is to kind of add to the page almost. And I think that's quite nice because I write quite dialogue-y. So it's just a question from Edie here. Is the plant key example a common one? Yeah, that's exactly where it's from. And what engine is it combined with Close Hands? So Close Hands was written in Hax, which is an open source language. And the reason I chose it was that it makes Windows, Mac, and Linux games all from one code base, which we like. But it works with, there's like an official library for JavaScript. So if you wanted to make a web-based game or whatever, it totally works. Unity has got official integrations and stuff. But what I'm going to show you now is actually, even if you're just dabbling and you've never programmed, you can still send people your Ink games. And all you need to do is, so I've got my dungeon one here. Wait, am I sharing this? No, I'm not. Classic. Yeah, so I've got my story here. I'm going to get rid of this. Don't need you. So I've got my dungeon here. And then if I go to File, export to export for web, sorry, not JSON. So you can export to JSON and it spits out a data file that engines can use. But actually, if you export for web, what it will do is Twine dumps out just a HTML file that contains everything that you need to play your game. Ink is a little bit different in that it spits out a folder, but it's still web stuff. So you can still stick it on a web server. So it's going to spit out a folder that's got this name. And if I look here, I've got Easy Dungeon here. And in fact, actually, that My Cool Adventure was the Twine version. And this is what Ink does, is spits out a folder. And in that folder, there's a load of JavaScript that contains kind of all the logic and stuff. But if you run index.html, whether it's on your computer or on a web server, you get an equivalent kind of experience, and it's got animation and stuff in it. It's not bad. It's a bit bare bones, but it is playable. It's totally fine. And I use this all the time for sending my work to other writers or producers or whatever to say, hey, I've made this thing. I haven't plugged it into the engine yet, but you can play it. And so straight away, you can see exactly what we saw. So the editor lets you play it like this. So I check the door, blah, 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 blah. And this does exactly the same thing. So we're going to check the door. All the variables under the hood are doing exactly the same thing. This is just a nicer front end. And you could drop this on a web server and it will just work straight away. Okay. So, and then when this goes off the screen, it scrolls and stuff. And it also works on mobile as well, which is great. So sending stuff out like this is really good. And in fact, I might have a, something like that. I don't know. I can't remember. I'll find it anyway, but I've got a load of web-based samples so you can kind of see that they feel like novel pages. They're quite nice. So yeah, that's kind of the deal for Ink anyway. So conceptually, just the way it works is that we've got the web version here, but in a real project, you edit your Ink files. So .ink is just the thing that we've been editing here. And so actually Ink will work on through text editors. So I used to edit this in a code editor as well. So it'll go into GitHub and stuff. So programmers, if you do this stuff, because it's plain text, it will go into version control quite nicely. And then, yeah, so once you've got it, it'll plug into lots and lots of different things. So after this session, I'm going to send you a load of examples. So I'll pull out some stuff from Closed Hands so you can see real working examples of real stories written in this stuff. And I'll send you a load of examples of games as well. So the range of games, so Inkle, who make Ink, make amazing video games. So they've made games on Switch and PC for ages, really, really high-end 3D games, but all of the dialogue and text is all Ink. So although you've got this massive whiz-bang clever 3D stuff going on, the actual guts of it are written in Ink, and it's really, really clever. But yeah, I'm going to stop it there. I appreciate that I've just fired 10,000 things at you all.